Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have part 2 of my interview with George Mycock from MyoMinds. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and a written review if you have the time for it on any of the audio platforms that you may be using to listen to the podcast. Rating and reviewing really help get the podcast out to more people, which in turn makes the Fit to Transform podcast more appetizing to guests, which means I'll be able to get more and more well-renowned guests for my interviews, and therefore benefit you all. So thank you so much for taking the time to support the show. Going back to the story, I was weight restored, though barely, but I still had disordered behaviors, even if the worst of it was behind me. And this is when I graduated from high school in Italy, and I moved to Portsmouth in the UK to start my undergrad degree. And while doing my undergrad, I wasn't weighing myself, and I wasn't counting calories, and I was eating enough not to lose any more weight, but I was still terrified of regaining weight. I was still restricting my food choices, following the same food rules I explained earlier. And so, how did I manage to maintain my weight and not to lose it if my behaviors hadn't really changed that much? Well, first of all, I wouldn't say I was over exercising, or I wasn't exercising as much as I used to. And I also wasn't over exercising in the technical sense, meaning I wouldn't say I had overtraining syndrome at any point. But I had an obsessive mindset around exercise still. I would do it no matter the conditions, and I would never miss it. For example, I would still go running, so I stopped the exercising before meals, but I would always go for my 4 runs every week for an hour. And it didn't matter if it had to be super early in the morning and it was still dark and really cold in winter, and maybe not always super safe for a 20-something who weighed 100 pounds soaking wet and presented as a young girl. Did not care. I still did it. I actually got together with my partner towards the end of undergrad, and one day she got really scared because I went out even though there was a storm, and I came back drenched, but it was the day and the time for my workout, so I had to do it. So I wasn't training too much or enough to develop overtraining syndrome, but I was training with an abusive/obsessive relationship with that. And I also traded one obsession for another. Maybe I wasn't doing cardio workouts as much as I used to, but I traded that for doing far too many steps. I was doing 30,000 steps per day plus at one point. So that's about 6 hours of walking every day. You can tell I was going to uni at this point because I had a lot of time on my hands to waste on this stuff. And that also resulted in ongoing issues. To this day, I have calluses under my feet that are really painful. I have a problem with my gait that causes me pain in the lower back. And I strongly believe that that's as a result of doing all of those steps for what amounted to about 3 years. And when it comes to nutrition, how did I manage to not lose weight? So overall, I probably reduced my energy expenditure enough that I wasn't out training the calories I was eating as I was able to in the past. But also, I think the key was that I wasn't tracking calories and I wasn't actively trying to eat as little as humanly possible.
I took an approach where I was keeping an eye on my caloric intake. This is really weird, but I think eating disorder behaviors are quite peculiar sometimes. Like looking back on this now, I'm thinking this makes no sense. I would keep an eye on my caloric intake in that I still wanted each food to have a small enough amount of calories per 100 grams, but I wouldn't add up the calories of each portion. So I didn't know how many calories I was eating at the end of the day. What mattered was that on the label, it would say an amount of calories that I was happy with. And as long as the fats and the sugars were below 3 grams per 100 grams, my brain was like, yeah, that's good. Makes no sense because that's not how calorie balance works. But that's how my brain accepted it at the time. And that resulted in some really uncomfortable eating episodes. Like, for example, I was probably as a result of the mental restriction, excessive mental restriction, where I still had a very short list of allowed foods that were healthy enough for me. I was likely experiencing, if not physical hunger, psychological hunger. So I would try to fill that up by having massive portions. Like I remember in UK supermarkets, they sell 500 grams bags of parsnips. Parsnips are root vegetables. They are really high in fiber. They are really filling. Now, if I eat 100 grams of parsnips, that's a lot. I would eat a whole bag, a 500-gram bag of parsnips in a meal. I would end up bloated. I would end up feeling physically in pain from eating that much food that weighed so much and took up so much space. And but it was to me, to my brain, well, it's low calorie, low sugar, low fat, and it's a vegetable, so you can have a big portion. So that's what I did, uh, at the expense of how I physically felt. So that's how I assume that I was able to maintain my weight, if that makes sense. But I wasn't happy. I still had this obsessive relationship with food and exercise that I really wanted to change. I just didn't know how to do it yet. And I continue to do research to find out the way that suited me, because I also realized that there were a number of ways to do it. And something I stumbled across in 2017 was the concept of intuitive eating, as and by that I mean the actual intervention of intuitive eating, by as was conceptualized originally, I believe, by Evelyn Tribble and another researcher. So I looked into that, and again, I was still very headstrong, still very young. I thought, I'm gonna do this by myself. I had no understanding of the fact that it was an intervention that you undergo with a professional. So I was living in London because in 2017, I got an internship for a year in London as part of my university degree. I could do what's called a sandwich year, where you, between second and third year, you go away for a year working for a company if you get a placement. I did get a placement for an audiobook production company because my degree is in creative writing and media. And so I lived in London and I underwent this intuitive eating approach. And it did actually help to an extent because I exposed myself to a lot of fear foods that I was terrified of. I ate cake, I ate fries for the first time in ages. So it was helpful to overcome some eating disorder behaviors. And I even gained weight. I gained about 6 kilos or around 14 pounds, which as I said, at this point, I was on the cusp between underweight and normal weight. So this wasn't necessarily weight that wasn't healthy for me to gain. But it still didn't feel right to me. By the end of that period, I still hated exercise because I only did it for fear of weight gain, even though, again, this is another dichotomy that's common in eating disorder behaviors, whereby I allowed myself to gain weight via intuitive eating, but I would still exercise for fear of gaining weight, even though I was letting it happen on the nutrition side of things. Very strange behavior that, if you look back on it, I look back on it now, I'm like, doesn't make any sense, but that's how my brain worked. So what didn't feel right to me was the relationship with exercise and the concept of intuitive eating, because, as I alluded to when we started talking, I love personality psychology, and through Jungian theories of personality, I've learned a lot about myself, and I use those to work with my clients as well. It's given me a lot of insight into myself, and I bring this up because one of the things that these theories have taught me is that, for me, one of the main ways in which I gather information and process it in order to make a decision is through understanding, creating, and manipulating systems. So I have a very data driven mind, and that's why I struggle with more intuitive processes that involve listening to physical and emotional needs. So it's not that I can never learn to listen to these needs. It's not like I can't understand them at all, but it takes me a lot of effort. To make a comparison, it's like trying to rely on these intuitive processes is like trying to learn a third language beyond English and Italian, whereas systems are my first language. Data, numbers, systems. It's like I was born speaking this language. It's second nature to me. So, for all these reasons, I still wasn't satisfied with the approach that I was taking. And that takes me to where muscularity started to come into the picture for me, or at least an interest in building muscle came into the picture. And that was when in 2018 I had an epiphany about my gender identity. When I moved to the UK for the first time in 2015, I was also exposed to people who didn't identify as cis men and women. I met people who identified as non binary, gender fluid, transgender. In Italy, I'd never come across anyone like that. In fact, at the time, it was a very conservative country, and I only knew about trans women, and I only knew about them because they were spoken about in negative terms. I never looked into it, so I didn't even know that trans men existed. So at university, I started exploring my own gender. And at first, I adopted the label of gender fluid, but it didn't sit right with me. And in 2018, it was the first time I asked myself if I could be anyone I wanted without thinking about what other people are going to think of me. Who would I be? And without thinking about other people is important because at this point I was still really influenced by what my parents would think of me. And that's a reason why I never actually been honest with myself about my gender. But when I asked myself that particular question, the answer struck me with the force of a lightning bolt. I didn't even hesitate. I thought to myself, oh, no question, I'd be a guy. And then it all made sense. So I realized that I only used the label gender fluid because the way I interpreted it, it meant I could wake up one day and feel more aligned with the female gender, and then another day more aligned with the male gender. I didn't need to change my name. I didn't need to change my pronouns. I didn't need to come out to my parents and disappoint them. But it was just a band aid. And the second thing I understood was why I never related to those girls and women with anorexia. Because the reason why I wanted that malnourished body was that my chest was flat, my hips were as slim as they would ever get because there was no fat on them, and I looked like a boy. That's why I wanted to look that way. And I that's one of the reasons why I developed a restrictive eating disorder and wanted to maintain that extremely slim physique.
And did that? Do you think that also came in with the muscularity stuff as well? And maybe you're going to talk about this. I don't know, but
Yes.
obviously the muscular build is what we typically align with, like masculine people. So I was wondering if that.
So that's not quite what I was thinking at the time.
Mm,
What happened was that I decided that if I had developed an eating disorder in an attempt in a subconscious attempt to transition, I could do the same thing without destroying my body, but actually by building it up.
mm.
So first, I looked into the medical side of things. I wanted a referral to a gender identity clinic, and I wanted to start taking testosterone. And I wanted to undergo at least one gender affirming surgery. I want my breast tissue removed. But then, because the waiting list is literal years long. Even to this day, it's ridiculous how long we need to wait for proper transgender healthcare. In any case, moving on, I decided I could also work on my transition by myself. And I thought, okay, what could help me look more like what my brain believes I was meant to look like? And the immediate thought was, well, if I were more muscular, I'd probably look more masculine. So that's how I discovered bodybuilding. And that's when I fell in love with exercise for the first time in my life. It was so fascinating to me that I could manipulate my body with the right training and nutrition approach. It was a system that with principles that made sense to me. I cannot explain how nerdy I am. And when I learned that there were scientific rules around bodybuilding, I was like, this is the best type of exercise ever. And this is not to say that endurance training does not have rules that are also steeped in scientific principles, but I was ignorant of them. And at that point, I was also burnt out on all the cardio I was doing. So I didn't care if there was a system. I just wanted something different. And for me, that something different was lifting weights. And the first time I tried it, I loved it. I loved it more than I'd ever liked cardio. It helped me. Cardio always felt like dissociating from my body because it was just uncomfortable the whole time. I never stopped. I never allowed myself to slow down, take a breath. There was no concept of pacing myself. I just needed to run as fast as I could for the hour that I had allotted to it. But with resistance training, I had to do just a few reps and then put the weight down and rest. I was actually able to think and be present in my body for the first time ever. So, in addition to it making sense to me from a theoretical standpoint, it was also the first time I actually felt connected with my body and with the present moment because being so goal oriented, I'm always focused on the future. I never quite stop to think about the present and enjoy the present or even acknowledge that the present is a thing. I'm always thinking about what's next on my plan. And resistance training gives me that moment in time where, unless I want to really botch a set, I need to be present. I need to be thinking about what I'm doing right now. Not the next rep, not the next set, just the moment in time. And I fell in love with that.
Yeah, and this is where, like, I think your story I find so interesting, and it's helped me gain a different perspective on because my research and my area is so focused on muscularity oriented disordered behaviors and how they can be problematic for people. And I know that there are positive forms of it, but also within eating disorder research and eating disorder world in general, a lot of people think that looking at things in a systematic manner where you can manipulate stuff would be a problem. But when I've spoken to you about it, it seems so helpful for you, and it's amazing to see, because I think it shows how complicated this is and how I think a lot of people get almost like upset or like riled up by the idea that someone can still track stuff and still follow these kind of ideas and not and like be getting better from their disordered eating. But I see that in you, and you when we talk about it, I can see that how it's helpful, and it makes sense to me when I hear you speak about it. That I really like that, and it isn't for everyone. I'm not saying everyone should be doing it. Like if I did that, I would know I would feel worse because that's just the way my brain works. But like you say, the fact that your brain aligns with this systematic thinking and it helps you work towards recovery, it's so interesting to me and so nice to see and like refreshing to see, because so many people, I think we just mimic the words that everyone says around eating disorders and just go, oh, tracking is bad and this is bad and whatever. But for some people it's not. Some people it is helpful, and it's about working with the individual. For you this is helpful, and that's nice to hear and see those kind of different views. And another reason why hearing people's stories is so important, because we can learn these kind of things.
I agree. And my current perspective is that no one behavior is only helpful or only harmful, because I would say that to an extent, bodybuilding has negative effects on me as well. At the same time, for me as an individual, the negatives outweigh the positives at this moment in time.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, going back to the story, at this time, when I first started bodybuilding, the goal was to help my transition by trying to masculinize my physique. so that while almost as a bridge between me getting medical attention and being able to get on testosterone, and me not doing anything about my transition at all other than waiting. But then that quickly, I know a lot of gender diverse people who maintain that goal in the long term. For me, that drive ceased really quickly to be replaced with bodybuilding for the sake of bodybuilding, because I just loved it. And I wanted to learn more about it. I wanted to do it more. I wanted to learn more from researchers that I admired and other coaches in the space. That's when I decided I wanted to become a personal trainer and a coach and a nutritionist. And I have no plan on stopping being a student and a practitioner of this non-competitive bodybuilding lifestyle, as I call it, because at this moment in time, I've never competed and I don't know if I ever will. And through this process, that's when I actually started a new leg of my recovery, where I learned how to fuel myself to perform in the gym, but also to feel good outside of the gym. Because I think something helpful about bodybuilding is that it doesn't just, your performance, it's not just limited to your performance in the gym. If you want to be a bodybuilder, you take that into every area of life, because recovery is very important, which means that sleep and stress management and nutrition, outside of nutrition for performance, are all important fundamental aspects of the process. So I didn't just care about eating and eating the right amounts of food and the right kind of foods in order to fuel performance, but also to feel good in general, because I knew that if I felt good, it would also help bodybuilding. And also because once I started feeling better, I was like, oh, this is great. I want to do it just because it's cool. It feels good. So there was an intrinsic motivation, and also there was a drive towards improving bodybuilding. And I finally started nurturing my relationship with exercise, which meant I stopped doing any form of exercise I didn't like. I stopped obsessively walking for endless hours every day. But I also changed from when I was a child, and I just didn't like any form of exercise, and they all made me uncomfortable, in that for the first time ever I actually looked forward to training. And if I decided to take some time off of training, like to go on vacation, I would miss it. When I was a kid, I would never miss exercise. I dreaded the day that I had to exercise again. So it really changed my entire perspective, whereby my inner drive was no longer don't exercise because it feels uncomfortable, like when I was a kid. It was no longer exercise to lose weight or to avoid gaining weight. My drive was do what you're passionate about and what makes you feel good.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting just to hear. There's so many kind of there's so many like alignments and parts of our story that I think are similar, but maybe affected us differently. And I also loved bodybuilding, but I think the reason I loved it, for me anyway, was similar to what you were talking about before, with like it was the protection against the guilt, or protection against something that I was afraid was going to happen. And whereas it sounds like to you it was more, I really love that you put, you spoke about the fact that you missed exercise, and that there was enjoyment to it now, which is a huge part of that relationship with exercise. And also you mentioned the, oh, my mind's gone blank on it now. But yeah, and either way, it sounds like your relationship with exercise became so much stronger, in like that more positive, rather than I need to do it. It's I want to do it. I want to do this because it's fun, because it makes me feel good,
Yes.
and that's really positive to see.
And I should stress, not only did I miss exercise when I chose not to do it, but it's important that I chose not to do it,
Yeah.
which was unprecedented. When I was dealing with the eating disorder behaviors, there was no world in which I would choose not to exercise, because it seemed so crucial to either losing weight or maintaining the weight loss. And I was afraid of missing exercise and to feel and feeling guilty about it. Whereas now, I actually chose, I'm going on vacation. I don't want to train this week. It's fine, because nothing is going to happen. And lo and behold, nothing did happen. But I actually made the choice rather than being forced not to exercise because I was sick or injured, for example.
And is that like, so whereabouts are you now, like in kind of present day, like your relationship with exercise, food, body, like how does that all, where does that sit you now?
First of all, another important turning point in my life was the realization that no behavior is healthy or unhealthy per se. Because I went through a phase where I felt ashamed or guilty for some of my behaviors because I associated them with the eating disorder. For example, I used to worry that since I'm still to this day tracking my calories and macros, that was, in quotation marks, bad because it was a behavior I had when I had an eating disorder. But now I've realized that it's the intention behind the behavior that matters. And while I first came across this concept years ago, I've only really embraced it in the last probably couple of years, where now I don't really look at what I do. I try to question why I do it. And that's important because I spent years engaging in behaviors that I'm now really happy to engage in, but at the time I beat myself up for them because I thought that they were disordered. So where I'm at now is I'm data driven. I like systems, I speak in systems, and therefore I think that tracking calories and macros is really enjoyable. There are people who hate it. They're like, I can't be bothered. I'm like, no, it's so fun to me. At the same time, I don't spend hours on my fitness pal trying to play macro Tetris. I don't have an emotional breakdown if the app has a bug and I can't access it one day. I'm perfectly capable of not tracking if I decide not to. I also don't just look at the calories, I prioritize the food choices that I make, and then they fall into place with regards to my macros and calories. But often with people who have more of an obsessive relationship, it's really the numbers that matter, not so much what you put on your plate. Whereas I really focus on what is it that I'm eating, and is it making me feel good? Am I getting a good digestive response? Do I like this food? Am I enjoying it? Does it fit within my lifestyle, or is it taking me 3 hours just to prepare it when I really don't have time for that? I take into account my preferences as well as my goals, and I make sure that I can choose not to do it and be okay with it. I think that's one of the most important criteria for me, because at the time I had an eating disorder, there were behaviors that I couldn't not do. So I know now that if the answer to the question, can you stop doing this and be okay? If the answer is no, I know that I need to work on that particular component of my life.
Yeah, that dependency, isn't it, is a word I'd probably use. If you're dependent on it, like you can't not do it. Like you say, that's the thing. I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think for a long time, like the example that immediately comes to mind, for a long time and still to this day, there are clinicians in like eating disorder services and in whatever who get people to just stop exercising altogether, and say that, oh, if you ever had an eating disorder, you just shouldn't exercise. Like, just don't do it because it's really bad for you. It's dangerous, and you shouldn't be doing it. But that's unrealistic, and you get a lot of stuff from it. And people do get a lot from exercise in different forms, in different ways. And it's better to educate people how to do it safely. And I feel the same with tracking. Like, I personally don't track because I've tried, and I can't have a healthy relationship with it, and I think that's the case for a lot of people. But again, with yourself, and there are other people I know who seem to be able to have this healthier relationship with tracking that can be helpful. And again, if we put shame on them and say like, you're doing the eating disorder thing by doing this, you're just causing unnecessary distress. Whereas why can't we instead have a healthy relationship with that person, and say, or have a healthy conversation with that person about it, and say, right, like you're saying, if you couldn't do it, what's going to happen? If you go off your calories or your macros or whatever it is, does that cause you like significant distress? Okay, if it does, maybe we need to talk about reducing it or changing things. But if it doesn't, then maybe it's okay. And again, it's individual. Like, there are a lot of people it won't help, and there's maybe a lot of people who it will help, who currently I don't think we speak to enough.
I wonder about this, I wonder if a contributing factor to this black or white view of certain behaviors, oh, you shouldn't do this ever, or you should do this all the time, maybe in part stems from one contributing factor, as I started saying, could be the fact that we tend to maybe think of these behaviors as if we'll use them forever. For me, what was really helpful was the working with my clients was understanding that everything is a tool, and a tool is temporary. You can switch between different tools. You're not forced to use the same one forever. And I think that's helpful to me, because in certain circumstances, a tool might be helpful, and then under different circumstances for the same person might no longer be necessary or helpful. For instance, when I got into bodybuilding, that's when I started tracking calories again. Previously, when the eating disorder was at its worst, it probably wouldn't have been helpful. But when I got into bodybuilding, that was the only way that I actually felt comfortable diversifying my food intake, finally letting go of all of my good and bad food dichotomy, because I could put those foods into a system. And that's how I managed to conceptualize that it was fine to eat them. And then, but that was that stage. Now I no longer need tracking to allow myself to eat a certain food. Now, if I want to eat fries and I decide not to track that day, I will still eat the fries, even if I don't necessarily fit them into my calorie targets. So this is just to say that you go through different phases. And similarly, I've worked with clients who I don't work with people with active eating disorders because I'm not trained to do that. But we all have a relationship with food. And my message resonates with a lot of people who have restrictive behaviors or have had restrictive behaviors. So when they come to me, they still have some of these. And we work on really letting go of them. And for many of them, calorie tracking is at that point in time just as helpful as it was for me when I got into bodybuilding, because they will tell me it's the only way I've managed to regain a healthy amount of weight. If I hadn't tracked my calories, I would have never eaten more. So we work eventually on detaching them from this dependency on calorie tracking, because if you depend on the tool to accomplish a goal like eating enough, that's also not helpful. But at that particular moment in time, they didn't know any better. So it was the most helpful thing that they could have chosen. And I don't think it would be fair to remove that altogether because it's not healthy to be dependent on it. Maybe in a particular stage of somebody's life, for a few months or however long it takes, maybe that dependency is a necessary step to bridge the gap between them not eating at all and maintain a dangerously healthy weight, and being able to eat because it's intrinsically necessary to humans without the need to track their intake. And I'm living that reality myself, where first tracking was harmful to me, then it became the only reason why I overcame a lot of my disordered behaviors, and now I track because I enjoy it, but it's not the necessary condition without which I wouldn't eat.
Amazing. Yeah. And I'm going to have to start to move us on now because I'm recognizing we've been going for an hour and a half. We're still on question one.
Yes, I can talk a lot.
we got 20 minutes left till you said you needed to go. But I do think, just to round up that thought there, I think we spoke about it on your podcast. Meeting people where they're at is really important, and that's the part of this. Is if that's the place where people are at, sometimes you need to start there and slowly move them towards a healthier mindset. Is there anything else you want to talk about with your story before we do move on to the other two questions that we're going to have to squeeze in 20 minutes?
I think it wouldn't be an objective conversation if I also wasn't authentic about. I've talked about everything that's better now, but it's not all fine and dandy. For example, on the when something I'm still working on is becoming independent from tracking. I'm more independent than I've ever been, where I can track. I can go one day without tracking and it's fine. But I'm not totally comfortable going for a prolonged period of time where I don't track. So the next step that I'm personally working on in my journey is to be able to just shift seamlessly between tracking and not tracking and feel comfortable for long periods of time doing both. And also on a more extreme, on the more extreme end of the spectrum of what's not going really well, or where I would want to improve, is that I realize that when I'm in a state of extremely high stress, that's when some old disordered behaviors get triggered again. And when it's, let's say, low to moderate stress, that doesn't happen. That's why I didn't become aware of this until 2022, when I developed a case of extreme chronic constipation. And I spent many months in the dark about what was happening to me. And as humans, we're afraid of what we don't know. So I felt lost. I felt hopeless. I had suspicions, but there was no real diagnosis. I started thinking I would never improve and get to the bottom of it. And to me, the result of that chronic constipation was I couldn't sleep at night because of the pain I was in, the abdominal pain. I was uncomfortably bloated all day long. And that's when, for the first time ever, I I felt those thoughts of restricting my caloric intake resurfacing, and of restricting my food intake as well. Because I thought, if I eat less, maybe I'll be in less pain. And um, if I eat, if I avoid certain foods, maybe they won't trigger more pain. So that's also something that I know now I need to work on, which is my coping mechanism for extreme distress still has to do with eating disorder behaviors. And that's something I'm aware of, thankfully, now, thanks to that experience, and that I'm working on.
Yeah, and I think, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but at least from the stories that I hear and the people that I talk to in this field a lot, I think a lot of us have that. When something is horrible, like when life gives you something really stressful, you tend to fall back on your default. And for those of us who have experienced these kind of things, that is something we fall back on, and it's about having the tools in place to move away from it. You recognize, okay, I'm doing this thing again. Right, how did I get away from this? Okay, rather than taking me 6 years this time, it takes me
Yeah.
2 days, or it takes me a day. The first of all might be a week, and then you kind of slowly work down to now it takes me half a day probably. When I have a really horrible moment, I'll lean back to those kind of things, and then I go, wait a second, this doesn't help. I remember that now. I'll move back. But I do want us to move on, and I'm really sorry too, because I don't want
okay.
to end quickly. I think we'll skip over question 2 just because I don't think we've got enough time to do both of them. So we'll go instead to question 3, which is, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your story, because I know that it's a lot, and I really appreciate you sharing it, and I'm sure the people listening are really interested in your story and find it really interesting. I certainly do. And now you are sharing your story on this podcast, and I think when we spoke about it on your podcast, you mentioned to me before it was like the first time you'd spoken about it on there before. I think anyway, if I remember right.
About certain aspects, yes.
Yeah. And getting to that point where you can share it with people, and especially share it with people on a podcast or on a media source, is quite a big thing. And we all do it for different reasons. I do it for different reasons. Why is it you chose to share your story here in particular, and I suppose with people in general?
So, the first and most important reason is that, as everybody has been made very obviously aware at this point, is that I love the sound of my own voice. I can clearly go on for ages.
Well, it's me asking questions as well. I mean, we're both the problem here. I'm interested, and you like to talk about it, so it's great.
But on a serious note, the first reason has to do with me personally, and it's that while I've shared my story at various points in time, this is the first time that I've shared the story up to year 28 of my existence. So I've been as thorough as I could in the time we had, and it worked. And I expected that it would work as a bit of a catharsis for me. And as I've said, I get to the end of a train of thoughts when I talk about it. So I think that once I've processed this conversation, it will give me more insight into myself. So that's the first reason. The second reason, and it's related to the specific audience that this podcast has, and I believe that your listeners are the people who need to hear stories like this the most, and that may be why they tune in. I used to read all of those accounts of girls and women with anorexia, not only to better understand the eating disorder, but also because it felt reassuring. It made me feel less alone. it made me feel less weird, even because I knew that some of the things I did, like going through a whole packet of sugar-free chewing gum in a day, were weird things. And I think it was reassuring when I read on some blogs that people chewed gum all day long too, and I wasn't alone. And I think this feeling of relatedness, which based on some theories, on self-determination theory in particular, is one basic human need. I think fulfilling that need contributed to my recovery. And if I can help somebody else towards, even just one person, towards their own recovery by sharing my story, then it was worth it.
Amazing. Yeah, and I completely agree. I used to do the chewing gum thing as well. I was famous for always having chewing gum with me. So yeah, I relate to that. And yeah, similar reason why I like to share my story is like you. I reading things online and hearing people's stories, especially with me because it was all weightlifting. Everyone's story about weightlifting was how it helped them feel better in their mental health, because they were doing loads of exercise, and I was doing it all but not feeling better. And I was like,
Mhm.
so I never heard anyone's story like mine. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, and very similar. We've now got 10 minutes left till we need to make a dead stop, so we're going to move to the final three, which I ask every single guest. So we're going to reel them off. These are kind of quick fire, but feel free to expand on them as well. Name a person that inspires you.
Okay, so that would be Orochimaru-sama from Naruto, which is a manga or anime for people who don't know. I'm specifically referring to Orochimaru-sama before Naruto Shippuden began, which is the second season of the anime and the second half of the manga, because by then his character was sadly, uh, he was changed to someone. He stopped being who he was in the original
Okay.
story, sadly. So it did not, it wasn't the same for me anymore, but I've always been inspired by him. I met him when I started reading Naruto and I was 11, and something that he taught me that was pivotal to my growth was that it's okay to want to pursue your goals at any cost, because that's what he does. He's one of the main antagonists in Naruto. He's an extremely intelligent and curious man who is investigating the immortality. His goal is to become immortal, and he will do whatever it takes to achieve that goal. He's not evil for the sake of being evil. He kills people because he's experimenting on them to figure out how to become immortal. And I didn't quite realize this when I was 11 because I was way too young. But he was an important example for me because I grew up feeling really guilty for how driven I was and for how committed I was to my goals, to a point where I would take a very Machiavellian approach. And I simply didn't have, and I don't have, the same moral compass that seems to be, I don't know if it's common, but it's definitely was held up as the gold standard in our society. And whenever I made a comment, because I like to talk and I don't have a good filter, I certainly didn't as a child. When I made one of my Machiavellian comments, so to speak, when I was young, I always got a lot of negative feedback that made me feel like I was a monster. And it wasn't a helpful narrative for a child and a teenager to have this constant noise in my head that suggesting that I was monstrous and that people were repulsed by my ideas and that my ideas were wrong. Again, remember, I had a very black or white mindset at the time. So my ideas were either wrong or they were right. And by reflecting on him, on Orochimaru-sama, which is why I always call him Orochimaru-sama, because Sama is an honorific to extend respect to that person. It's a very high, if it's a very strong honorific. He would use that with your master or your teacher, or your lord even, because he is a lord in the story. But anyway, I can't refer to him with his name only because I respect him that much for how he helped me overcome this negative talk that I've had ever since I can remember.
Amazing. Yeah, that's really. I don't think we've had. I'm trying to think if we've had um characters from like a series or like a fictional show kind of thing in the past. It's really, I really like that, and I love it. Almost, you spoke about Jungian psychology in the past. It almost reminds me of like Jung's like shadow stuff of like recognizing that side of you that people might not understand or might not immediately integrate with, and being able to respect that and acknowledge that. And I think, yeah, it's really a nice one, an interesting one, a different one, which I really appreciate. So thank you.
Well, I am a fantasy writer when I'm not
Yeah.
coaching people, but also I think what it helped me do was again take another step towards the understanding that nothing is good or bad per se. It's the intention driving you, that's what
Mm.
matters. So that I learned, okay, my thoughts aren't good or bad. My brain isn't good or bad. I'm not sick in the head. I don't go around murdering people, for example. It's where I channel my personality, the way my brain works, my Machiavellian kind of way of thinking. It's where I channel it into, in the actions I channel it into that actually matter.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a really nice way of summing it up. Moving on to the next one. Name a phase of your life that you didn't like at the time, but looking back, you know that positives came from it.
Having an eating disorder. While it's devastated my body, as I've already said, and it changed the course of my life forever, without the eating disorder, I wouldn't be who I am today. I don't even know that I would have realized that I was transgender as quickly as or as early in life as I did. I don't know that I would have met the partner that I'm with to this day and that I've been with for 8 years now. I don't know that I would have been the same person. And I like the person I am and the life that I've led. So while I don't wish an eating disorder on anyone, I I appreciate what it molded me into.
Mm. Yeah, I always really like that one, because I think people listening who are maybe still going through their eating disorder at the moment, hearing that positives can come from it when you get to this point is really nice. So, and then the final one is a phrase or word that changed your life.
So this phrase has been with me since 2013. I was in America and I opened my very first fortune cookie and I read my fortune. And at this point, I was really struggling. As I've said before, this was the lowest point for me from an emotional standpoint with regards to the eating disorder. And when I read this fortune, it deeply resonated with me. And it's a quote by Benjamin Disraeli. And it says, "There is no education like adversity."
I love that, and it links so well to the to the phase of your life question as well. So yeah, I love that, and it's so true. You know, going through struggles, as much as it's hard to recognize it in the time, it really does, like, you know, help you develop so many skills and so many aspects of yourself that you end up loving. And you similar to what you said, you know, the disordered eating and stuff that I went through, and I was in such horrendous like mental health states at times. But I'm so thankful for it now, because it's made me, I understand myself now better than a lot of people understand themselves, and I think I have a way of being empathetic with people that I think a lot of people can struggle with at times. And yeah, I love that. Really nicely put.
When I found it, I knew right away. I didn't have to, sometimes things don't click with you until later in life because you have a
Mm.
greater understanding and greater insight. No, I was 17, as I said. I opened the cookie, I saw the fortune, and I was like, this is the biggest fucking adversity that I've ever experienced. So, yes, I understand this completely.
Who would have thought fortune cookie would have such a positive impact on someone's life? That's great. That's really nice. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed having this opportunity, and I'm really thankful to you, George, for inviting me, and to the listeners who stuck around for this long.
Yeah, well, we do long form podcasts here, and yeah, I really appreciate your time, and like I said, you know, I was so interested, I had so many questions, and I'm glad we managed to fit most of it in. There was more times, especially once we were getting to these last few minutes, where I was like, oh, I really want to ask about that, but maybe we can do another one at some point and talk
You
about
can
more stuff.
always ask me to come back because
Yeah,
I really love podcasting and I would be super happy to.
amazing. Well, thank you so much. And to the listeners, thank you so much for listening to the episode. And I hope to see you at the next one. Bye.
Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.